Hi, welcome back to Ask Maggie. We're going to get started in just a minute. Today is all about planning and timelines. So while I am waiting for our friends from David's Bridal, why don't you go ahead and get your questions in the comment section so that we, which is so exciting. Can't wait.
Hi, Maggie.
Hi, I was just inviting people to put their questions in the comment section so we can get started.
Awesome.
So as I was saying, we've tackled a bunch of other topics recently, such as budgeting, decor, and design. And today is all about planning and timelines, which we know they're super, super important when it comes to wedding planning. So it's almost time for us to get started. But I, again, want to encourage people to get those questions in. That way we can answer them. That's the best way for us to be able to tackle everything that you need for wedding planning. All right, it's just about time. So Laura, let's go. Let's talk about planning.
Let's kick it off. Okay, while we wait for some questions to come in, why don't we start high level? Maggie, is there an ideal number of months from engagement to wedding ceremony?
Sure. So it's really unique to each couple, right? Some couples want to plan and they want 2 years for a variety of reasons, whether it's budgeting reasons or they're just taking their time. Other people get married or get engaged and boom, they do it very quickly, right? Like it can be a month, it can be a day, 2 days. Ideally, in my opinion, the best is if you have 12 months to plan. It really allows you to enjoy the journey, number one, but two, be able to do things in a way that you don't feel rushed. So I know right now that's kind of difficult depending on where you live with how there's vendor shortages in some areas, but ideally 12 months is kind of the perfect spot when it comes to wedding planning.
I love that. Great recommendation. A question actually already came through about, a smaller venue that hosts maybe up to 20, 30 people. How early in advance would you recommend a couple booking a smaller venue like that?
Sure. So if you're having a smaller guest list, right, you have a lot more flexibility. I encourage people who are going to plan under 50 people to look at venues that aren't traditional wedding venues because you're going to have a lot more flexibility. So there's spaces such as museums or even restaurants that accommodate that many people. If you have months in advance, that's better. You're going to be able to pick and choose your venue and your location. But if you are only having about 20 or 30 people, you really can plan things much more quickly. I would say 6 months would probably be easy peasy with that amount of people.
Awesome. Another great question just came through about how do you handle telling your guests that your ceremony and reception will be child free? Do you put it on the invitation, website? What's your recommendation?
Yeah, I can't tell you the amount of times people have asked me this question. Okay, it is tricky because you want an adult only wedding, and that's fine. There's a couple of different ways to go about it. Number one, you can do it in the most traditional way, which is the way you word your invitation. So using the example with my family, I have 3 little boys. If I got an invitation in the mail that said Mr. and Mrs. Jonathan Lord, I know that means that they're only expecting me and my husband to go to the event. If the invitation reads Mr. and Mrs. Lord and family, then that's the clue that my children are invited. Okay, so that's number one. The way you word it on the invitation is really important. Number two, I would always put it on a wedding website someplace, and you can say it very politely. We love kids, but our venue and our ceremony and reception are going to be adults only. If it's a destination wedding or people are traveling, you might put in options for how they can get childcare. So that's kind of an easy way to help out your guest. But I think one is definitely the way you word it on an invitation. Number two is the way that you put it out there on your website. And then also it's really best if you have people close to you that maybe aren't sure, pick up the phone and call or send a text. The more you can communicate, the better it's going to be for you the day of.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Maggie, what would you say is the first thing a couple should do right after they get engaged?
Right. So you just got engaged. It's really exciting. Take a breath, enjoy it. Right. I always say that. Even take a week or two, just enjoy this bliss that you're in. Okay. That's number one. Then you get down to business. The first thing that you need to do, especially in the wedding world that we're seeing right now, is find a venue. And a lot of times you're not going to be able to pick your date. The venue is going to tell you what's available. So the minute you lock in a date and your venue, you can take then another step back and breathe a little bit and enjoy the next phase of just being engaged. So my answer to this is definitely lock in, try the venue and the date, and then you can relax a little bit.
Makes a lot of sense. We are certainly hearing a lot of venues have some pent up demand there, and it's even spilling into 2023, 2024. So that makes sense. So, and then kind of going off of that, when would you recommend starting to book your vendors for your ceremony?
Yeah, so I have this thing that I call the big three, which that I really firmly believe you need to book these three big vendors as early in the planning process as possible, so that it's could be a little stress free for you. So those three vendors to me are the venue, the catering, and then after that, it's really photography. There's a limited number of venues that you can get married, catering, and photographers that are available on the date that you're going to want. So once you lock in those three big vendors, then you kind of have a little bit of free time before you have to lock in the next chunk of vendors. So I would say to me, in my brain, it always makes sense to kind of have these buckets of time. So if you just got engaged, and let's take the idea that you have 12 months to plan, in the first 2 or 3 months, you're going to want to make sure you locked in your big three vendors. And then in that second bucket of time, you then have the opportunity to lock in the other vendors.
Makes a lot of sense. We just got a great question came through. Any tips for splitting the planning responsibilities? Who all should a couple expect to help in the planning process?
Yeah, that's of course going to be really unique to what the couple, wants, to who they want to involve and how they see their planning process working for them. I obviously always encourage couples to try to plan as much together as possible. It makes it feel like it's a joint venture, which is always really important. A lot of times there's usually one person who's a little bit more excited than the other one. But it's great if you can look at all the tasks that you have in wedding planning and really decide who's going to tackle what, because sometimes it will make more sense for someone else to kind of lead that. As we've talked about in our other Ask Maggie series, about the idea that, having like somebody like the DJ or a band might be really important to one person in the relationship, and then therefore they should take that planning lead. Again, if you're going to involve other people, such as parents or other family members, right, it's really nice to kind of sit down, talk with them about what are the areas of the wedding that they're really interested in and how they can help you. But it's as simple as looking at all of the planning tasks that you can find. You can print it out from a variety of sources online, and you can then go down the list and just kind of look at maybe who can take on what task.
Excellent. We have a follow-up to that, which is an excellent question. I know we probably all have experienced this at some point. How do you handle people who want to help a little too much?
Yes, I know. You know what? I always say to brides, there's a lot of people emotionally involved in a wedding, right? And in the planning process. And it's a great thing, right? It would be not as much fun if people weren't excited. So yeah, again, that to me goes back to kind of figure out who you can talk to about certain things in the wedding planning process and assign them some tasks. Now, there are certain situations where you're going to have to be, you're going to have to kind of decide, okay, this is, where we're going to be on an issue, and this is maybe a planning task that we want to take on as ourselves as a couple. So clear lines of communication always helps. I always say a bride that says yes to everything is not actually helping herself in the planning process. So, it's okay to say things like, we don't know yet, or thanks for the help when we get there. I'll be sure to include you. Open lines of communication are always going to help when it comes to wedding planning.
Great recommendation. Let's talk bridal party. So how, at what point in your engagement and wedding planning should you ask your bridal party to be a part of your day?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the earlier you can ask people to be in your bridal party, the better, because you're giving them the opportunity to then either save up for budget reasons if they have to travel, or any of the other responsibilities that will go into their duty at being in your bridal party. So the earlier you can, the better. Let's again take the 12-month period. Somewhere between the 10 and 12 months away from your event is ideal time. But I will say that you want to make sure that you have that list firmed up. There's nothing worse than forgetting to ask someone and adding someone later, or going like, whoops, I got too excited and I invited a bunch of people to be my bridesmaid, and now I really want to get it down to a smaller number. So as soon as you feel confident that the list that you have of who's going to be there by your side that day is complete, that's the right time to ask.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, let's talk rehearsal dinner. So what's kind of the etiquette around inviting, who should be invited to your rehearsal dinner? Out of town guests, just people in the bridal party? What's your recommendation there?
Yeah, traditionally, the rehearsal dinner takes place after the rehearsal of how the ceremony will run. And it is really reserved for the people in the wedding. So bride and the partner, and then, of course, all of the bridal party. And then what I always call the VIP, right? The families involved, the mothers, the of the groom, the father of the groom, all those extra special people, grandparents, right? They're usually invited. So that's number one. Anyone who has a role in the wedding is invited, and then VIP family. Now, a lot of couples will open it up to more people if they want to, if their budget says that they can. And it's really lovely to invite out of town guests or invite more people, but you don't have to. A rehearsal dinner traditionally is reserved for the people who have a role in the wedding, and it's a way to celebrate completing that actual run through of the event.
Excellent. So let's talk save the dates and invites. Can you share a little bit about a timeline between, depending on how long your engagement is, what's the typical recommendation around sending save the dates and invitations?
Yeah, this is a question that I get asked all the time. And I think it's because we don't really know, right? A lot of brides come in to wedding planning, and for most of them, it's their first event to plan like this. And so it's a little overwhelming. So the question about save the dates is any time that you can secure your date and location, you can go ahead and send out that save the date. I always suggest it somewhere between 10 and 12 months before the event. It gives everyone on your guest list the heads up that this is where it's going to be. This is what they need to, budget for travel. This is, where they're expected to be on that day. So the save the dates are usually about 10 to 12 months ahead of time. The invitation, and this is really the part that people don't know that much about, you don't actually send that far away from the actual event. So somewhere between 6, 9, and 10 weeks before the event, you're going to want to send out your invitation. Now, to me, the sweet spot really is about that 10 to 12 week before, because you have to factor in time for people to give your RSVP card back to you, or if they're RSVPing online digitally, which has become a really big trend, you still are going to have time that you're going to have to track people down. So save the date, 10 to 12 months. And the actual invitation somewhere between 6, 10, or 12 weeks before the event.
Awesome. Thank you. We actually got a follow-up question to the rehearsal dinner. So how do you tell someone from out of town that they aren't invited to the rehearsal dinner?
Right. So traditionally, we would include enclosure cards if you're doing a paper invitation that would also then have information about the engagement, about the rehearsal dinner. So therefore, that person knows that they are invited. If you're not doing paper invitations, you would then want to make sure that you're inviting them to the event separately from the digital invitation you're sending out. So again, you have to make it very clear who's invited, who's not, right? A lot of couples will find a way around this, and they will have the traditional rehearsal dinner, but they will also go ahead and later on in the evening open it up to all guests who have come to the event for perhaps after dinner drinks or things like that. So again, open lines of communication. You can simply say our rehearsal dinner is for those who have a role in the event, but we look forward to seeing you at such and such time the night before so we can celebrate.
A welcome party, so to speak.
Yep.
I love that. So Maggie, we've been using this 12-month kind of benchmark as for examples throughout today, but can you plan a wedding in less than 12 months?
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen it done 100 times. Like I said, you can plan a wedding in as short as, a day if you needed to. What it comes down to when you're deciding how much time is if you're going to be able to secure the location and the date that you really want. That is kind of what is dictating the planning cycle. And right now in the wedding world, actually, we're seeing these elongated planning cycles because venues aren't available for 12 months from today, let's say. So brides are having to plan for 18 or 24 months in order to secure the location that they want. My tip is if you're trying to plan a wedding in 3 or 6 months, is that the first thing you would need to do, of course, is get the venue, but then you need to articulate that you're having this event to your guest list as soon as possible, because a shorter time frame like that doesn't always mean that your guests are going to be available. So you would just have to push that planning task up further in the process.
That makes a lot of sense. And actually, on that topic of guest lists, when's the right time to create a guest list?
Okay, so a lot of couples think that you can wait longer than you can, and it doesn't have to be done automatically the minute you get engaged. But there's a lot of things that hinge on your guest list count. A lot of couples don't realize that when you go to a venue and they say, well, we can accommodate to up to 150 people. And then you sit back and go, oh, wait, we're creating a guest list for 200 or 225, right? So you have to have a rough estimate in your head before you start looking at venues. That's number one. Number two, when you start to refine the guest list, you really have to make sure that you're getting it right and that you're not going to be adding people left and right last minute. So again, you're trying to look at the venue, so they kind of go hand in hand. The guest list really should be a rough estimate when you look at venues, so 10 to 12 months. And then between that 8 and 10 months ahead of time is really when you need to have that guest list more refined.
Yep. All right, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about dress shopping. What's your recommendation around timing for not only the bridal gown, which of course is super important, but also anyone in the bridal party? What's that timeline look like, as well as alterations too?
Good question. I actually believe that you need to go earlier in the planning process than a lot of people think to look for your dress. And here's why. I really encourage brides to go in and look at dresses, try on dresses more than one time. And here's why. I really call them like, it's like a discovery or an inspiration appointment. Unlike any other garment that we wear, we don't know what looks good on us when it comes to a wedding dress. For most of us, you know, when you get married, it's the first time that you're trying these dresses on. So it's not like a pair of jeans that you go, oh, I know this looks good on me. This has always been my favorite style. So I encourage brides to go in, you know, around that 12, 11, 10 months, right? If that's about your time frame, to start, because I encourage you to go as many times as possible until you find the one. So the bride, you know, definitely needs to start looking for the dress sooner than she thinks, because also it's going to inspire the rest of what the wedding decor and everything looks like. It is a really important piece in that, which I think a lot of brides maybe don't know at the beginning of planning. For bridesmaids, again, once you lock in that list, then I would start you to encourage your bridesmaids to go out and start looking for dresses. I know sometimes it's hard because everyone's all over the country, but you know, it's really good if you can do that around the 7 to 6 months ahead of your date. That's going to be ideal. You know, and the same thing for all those other VIPs, you know, mother of the bride, mother of the groom. Don't let it go too long. I definitely encourage you to do it sooner in the planning process. And then alterations are critical, right? They really do play an important piece in getting that wedding day look perfect. And so alterations do need to happen about 2 to 3 months before the event, because they have to have time for those alterations to happen. Then you know, try it on again. One tip I'll say that people forget all the time: bring the shoes you plan on wearing to your alterations appointment, because it really does make a difference. Of course, it's going to be tailored, how long the dress is, the hem, everything to the shoes that you're wearing. So purchase the shoes when you purchase your dress, break them in, and bring them with you to your alterations appointment.
Oh, I love that recommendation too around breaking them in. I have been burned by that
Yeah.
before.
Yes.
We got a question, Maggie, around what are some ways that a bride or a couple can ensure everyone is on time on their wedding day?
Ooh, yeah. I am a stickler for time, and so this one really hits home to me. Here's what I'll say. You need to create a day of timeline. And you need to share it, and it needs to be shared with all the important critical people in the event, meaning you and your partner, your bridal party, and then of course, like again, those VIP family members, right? They need to know where they need to be at what time. So create a timeline, and you have to work backwards, right? Which a lot of brides don't know at the beginning part of planning process. So let's just say your ceremony is at 5 o'clock. Right? And everyone needs to be at the location by 4:30. That's when you start your timeline, and you work backwards until you actually get to like wake up for the day, hair and makeup. But communicate that as much as possible. Put a hard copy in everyone's hand the night before, and put in the directions or the address to absolutely every single place that someone needs to be, because I can't tell you the amount of people who go to a wedding and they don't bring the invitation. So they don't have the address for the location for the church or the ceremony site or whatever it is. So on that timeline, communicate what time they need to be there. I always say factor in about 20, 25 minutes earlier than you want them to be there. And then make sure you have in the address so that everyone knows where they need to be.
I've also taken pictures of things like that on my phones. We all have our phones with us too, right? Take a
That's
picture of
true.
your vacation. Okay, Maggie, what about if a couple wants to go on their honeymoon right after their wedding, day after, 2 days after, how soon or how far out would you recommend that they start booking that post-wedding event?
Yeah, travel is tricky, and we've seen it certainly be kind of a tricky environment for couples the past 2 years or so. But I encourage you that as soon as you know where you want your honeymoon to be, so that's really should be around the 6 month mark if we're going with for that 12-month planning process. To secure it, get it in, locked in where you're going to go, because it actually is part of the wedding budget. And so you're going to want to plan it so that you know what the cost is. And so it kind of factors in with everything else. And one tip I'll say is that if you are planning to leave the next day or 2 days after, you need to have everything packed that's separate, and you need to have it stored someplace, whether it's in the hotel room or someplace else. But that all needs to be done ahead of time because you're not going to have the time right then to pack. So pack everything that you need, get it stored away someplace, and then you can go enjoy your honeymoon.
Excellent. I want to go back to day of timelines a bit. Can couples lean on their vendors for recommendations on day of timelines? For example, how long do your pictures take on your day of? Can they lean on their vendors for that?
Yeah, I encourage them to, because after all, your wedding vendors are professionals and they do it over and over again. So especially with things like photography, you're going to want to ask your photographer, to your point, how long are these pictures going to take? And that way you can buffer it in and put it into your planning timeline. So things like pictures sometimes take a little bit longer because you actually have to wrangle everybody to be together. And that's sometimes not as easy as you think. So lean on your vendors, ask them from experience, should I, budget 2 hours for this? Is it 2.5 hours? And they will be able to work with you so that you get it correct. But it's what they do day in and day out. They're professionals. So, use their knowledge.
Totally. And how about a shot list? What is it? And who is that kind of in collaboration with your photographer or with your fiance?
Yeah, so a shot list is something that a photographer will ask for ahead of time. And it's something that you need to spend some time thinking about. What it is it's a list that you create for them, or in some cases, they'll give you one and you fill it in, of all the important images that you want on your day and the important people who are going to need to be in them. So you're going to have to think about that and fill it in so the photographer knows, and sometimes it's really up to the photographer's assistant to start wrangling everyone and say, oh, we're going to get a Lord family photo, and here's all the people in the Lord family that we need to gather. And then they start going to do that. So it's really critical. I always call it's the photographer's playbook for the day, because at the end of it, when you get those photos back, right, that's a result of how well you communicated to them what you wanted on that day. So the shot list is important. Again, you can lean on your photographer for help, but you and your partner are really going to have to come together and decide who are the critical people who need to be in the photos and what are the photos that you definitely want to have.
I love it. Let's talk about ceremony formats. So things like music, readings. What does that planning look like? Do you have any best tips or tricks as far as how far out you should start talking about that?
Yeah, so you don't have to lock it in until I'd say it's about 2-3 months ahead of time if you're going to be getting some sort of program printed for your ceremony, which usually kind of shows you the flow of what's going to happen and who's doing each part of that wedding. So that's really about 2 to 3 months ahead of time that you can lock it in. But you're going to need to communicate to anybody who's going to be a part of that, right? Again, these are more of like those VIPs. They're not traditionally a bridal party. But if you're asking someone to do a reading or do something else as part of the ceremony, you're going to want to communicate with them so they say yes. You know that they're teed up to do it for you and that they'll be there on your big day. But then you can lock in those details. What is the reading or what is the song that you want played about 2 to 3 months ahead of time.
And how about like something like a food or cake tasting? How far out should that be? And is that typically driven by your venue or by the couple?
Yep. So a cake tasting or the food tasting, right, will be really given to you by whoever's doing your catering. So if it's an all-inclusive venue and they're also doing the catering and the baking part of it, they'll bring you in and they'll give you sample menus, and then you can taste the food, and then you can decide on what the menu is and what the cake might be. If it's an all-inclusive venue, that's usually earlier on in the planning process, usually around 7 or 8 months, because it kind of dictates the package that you might have with them, right? The pricing is different depending on what sort of foods you might be putting on your menu. If you're doing a cake tasting that's separate from the venue and it's with an outside baker, you really don't need to do that. Probably around 5 months, sometimes even closer. It just depends on how busy your cake baker is. But I definitely would say those are some of their fun tasks to do. Enjoy them. But the cake is usually about 4 or 5 months out.
Makes sense. And how about a wedding website or registry? When should a couple start thinking about setting that up?
Yeah, I encourage that to be early on in the planning process, even if you get it started and then you add the details later, because it's going to be a great place. People get excited that they hear the noise that you've gotten engaged, and they want to start looking for details and things like that. So you can set them up, but you might not be able to populate them with the information that you need until a little bit later. But definitely early on in the planning process, start using those digital tools that are out there. The registry is great to set up. A lot of people will want to send you a gift for getting engaged, and you can do that. And then you can go later and refill it so that it's closer to your wedding day. So the registry part is really kind of an ongoing thing. But I would say early in the planning process, the better.
I love it. And Maggie, can you talk a little bit about the difference between a wedding planner and a wedding coordinator?
Yeah, this is one of those terms that people use kind of all the time and mix and match, and they're really two different things. So a wedding planner is someone that you're going to hire, and they will actually work with you for the entire time that you are engaged and help you plan each single phase of your event, including day of, right? So it's a completely different thing actually than a wedding coordinator. A wedding coordinator is someone who will come in closer. Sometimes it's a month before, sometimes it's 2 weeks before. And they're going to help you. It's actually just pulling all the pieces together, and they're kind of air traffic control for day of. So they're not going to actually do all the planning with you. They help you coordinate, but it's going to be much closer to the time of your event. A lot of venues will offer they have someone on staff who's their wedding coordinator, and they start working with you a little bit closer to the event. Again, they're air traffic control. They're going to make sure that things, are smooth day of.
Which is a huge lifesaver as the bride and groom,
Yes.
or the people getting married are just so busy that day. And so
Absolutely.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about marriage licenses? What's that timing look like? It's super important.
Yes. Okay. One thing that a lot of people don't know is that it is different depending on where you're getting married. So different states have different rules when it comes to marriage license, when you can get them, how close to the event that you can get them. Some places you have to get them 3 days ahead of time. Some places it's 6 days ahead of the actual event. So you have to do your research. You need to have that marriage license teed up, ready to go. Normally you'll go to some sort of town hall. Sometimes it's a county court. It depends on the state. But if you go to the state where you are getting married and get all that information ahead of time, it's going to be very helpful because it does change state by state.
That is a great recommendation. Thank you. Maggie, what would you say is kind of the best way to start thinking about your color scheme for your wedding?
Yeah, so color scheme is really one of those things that you need to kind of work on early in the planning process, because everything else will kind of be dictated by it: decor, design, florals, all those sort of things, even down to maybe the linens on the tables and your dishware and everything else. So that is usually after you've picked the venue, right? Then you're going to be able to start with the color scheme, and from there, inspiration you can find online and everything else will come out. So the color scheme to me is really much earlier than people think. And it's usually around the 10-month mark.
Yeah, to your point, it certainly informs so many other elements of your wedding.
Absolutely.
Maggie, what would you recommend should be at the very top of your wedding checklist or planning and timeline?
Yeah, so definitely finding a venue. But even before that, looking at how much time you have to plan this wedding. So we have wedding budgets, which we've talked about, but then we have wedding time budgets, right? And that's a whole other set of skills that you're going to need to kind of unpack in this planning process. So very early on, you need to decide when you're getting married, and that will really dictate then the order of events that you need to do to execute the day perfectly.
Excellent. So we've covered a lot today around planning and timelines. We're just about at time. Do you have any final recommendations or tips or tricks you want to share today?
Yes. So one thing I was thinking about is actually raining where I live today. And it really did occur to me that a lot of couples don't know that you might not be able to wait until the day of to decide with your venue if you're going to use a backup plan if it's raining or looks like bad weather. Many venues will actually tell you that they need 3 or 4 days ahead of time in order to put up a tent or make other accommodations that you might need. So you really do need to talk with your venue and find out what is the timing, if it rains or if it's bad weather, that you would need to tell them you're going to do your backup plan. So it's part of that timeline thing that I think a lot of brides don't know, but that's one of my favorite tips to share.
That is an excellent, excellent point. Thank you so much for your time today, Maggie. We covered a lot. We'll certainly save this to the Pearl Instagram, and we are going to meet again next week to chat more etiquette, I believe, is what we're chatting about.
Yeah, I'm so excited. We're going to talk all about wedding etiquette next week on Tuesday, the 27th. You can find these videos here on David's Bridal. And I'm just so excited to continue to share my wedding knowledge.
Thanks for your time, Maggie.
All right, talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.